Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off today by talking a bit about some of the news headlines you've seen recently about the record high temperatures in the month of July. And I just want to bring this up from kind of a meteorological perspective of what's going on so we can understand where these numbers are coming from. I also want to remind you that when we talk about record temperatures, remember our record length doesn't go back that far for what they're comparing to. So generally it goes back to about the 1850s. So the map I've been talking over is one I show you all the time. It's the current sea surface temperature anomalies. And so I'm showing you this because much of the record warmth around the planet has been because of very warm ocean temperature. This is the skin temperature of the ocean. Now we've had a lot of things, already showing up in this map that we've been discussing, like the development of El Nino. We've talked about the very warm water in the North Atlantic and also here in the Atlantic main development region into the Caribbean and into the Gulf. Lately, we've seen a pretty sizable increase in ocean temperatures just off the west coast of North America. That has eaten away at the colder water that has been here. Remember, we called this the negative phase of the Pacific meridional mode. But we've also watched throughout the month of July and now into the beginning of August, this large area here across the North Pacific that's gotten considerably warmer. The cooler water you have there was largely due to tropical systems that have churned up some cooler water. There's also some evaporative cooling there. But overall, you look at it, you see a lot of warmer spots. Now, what I want to remind you about here is that the ocean and the atmosphere are a coupled system. And I say that because when you see El Nino developing, that's actually a result of a reduction in trade wind speed. So more of the warm water that's been pushed for years over toward Indonesia comes back and it resurfaces. We talked earlier in the month of July about why this got so warm. A big area of high pressure set over this area. We saw very, very weak winds in this area, and therefore there was a lot of stagnant water that the sun beat down on and raised the temperature. We saw the same thing earlier in the year when we watched the very warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic build up. Trade winds normally blow in this direction. They're relatively strong. Well, they were considerably weaker this year, and we called that the Atlantic meridional mode changes, okay? But as of late, I'm keeping a very close eye on this area because of its influence on the position and strength of the westerly wind belt that comes into the United States. And we always need to be watching how warm the waters are here this time of year, because any tropical system that comes up into this area, as we've been talking about for the last few weeks, can then make its way into the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, which influences the height pattern of the Gulf of Alaska and ultimately the trough ridge systems across North America. So there's a lot going on here, but it is important to note that this is what we have, NOAA's records going back to about 1854, looking at this time period of ocean temperatures globally. So again, what you've got here compared to average, which is the zero line, and average is set by summing up all the data from 1901 to 2000, only for the month of July, so that's 100 years in the data set and averaging them. Then we just compare each year to that average. And so you can see we're way up here right now. So very, very warm, about a degree Celsius above average. So just important for us to keep this in the back of our mind, because this will ultimately be a major player driving our weather systems, these climatic features driving the weather systems going into this late summer, fall, and then eventually winter. We're going to talk about all of that at the end. So if you only want the long range, fast forward till I get to all of these tabs down here. But we have some severe weather to talk about. At the very end, I have some international weather to go over as well. So one thing I want to point out here is that even though we have this cooler water in place here, remember this is cooler than average, we actually have a pretty powerful tropical system rolling through there. This is an animation, infrared animation here of Hurricane Dora. Now Dora has really maintained its strength. It's quite small. We often refer to these as like a buzzsaw. Very compact tropical system here in terms of size, but it's got a tremendous amount of energy within it. And what's amazing about Dora is that looking here at the latest update out in the Central Pacific, which came to us last night at 11 p.m. In fact, let's see if they've done a new one here. Yeah, it's still the 11 p.m. update. This is going to move well to the south of Hawaii as a major hurricane, and that's kind of a rare thing because the ocean conditions, ocean temperatures, and then the wind shear here is typically such that anytime systems approach Hawaii, they get sheared apart pretty easily. Not the case this year. This one's going to maintain its hurricane strength, and there is the chance that it crosses the international date line as a hurricane. Now, there have been times, now this is just recollection here, that these systems have come over and made the turn, actually come back up and influence the jet stream level winds in the North Pacific. So I'll be watching for what the remnants of Dora do. But right now in the Atlantic, we're not really watching anything, and there is a weak tropical system off of Mexico's coast. Let me just show it to you real quick here, named Eugene. And Eugene had been thought that it could possibly come up and influence parts of Southern California, but I don't think it's going to be able to do that. So if we come back to the Atlantic, whoops, sorry about that. we notice that the next 7 days right now is forecast to be below average. Remember, we're at the very start of this hurricane season. The ensemble models still predict some easterly waves coming off of Africa. They've given about a 40 to 50% chance of something developing here. But it is important to note where our Bermuda high is. It's kind of elongated in this area, so systems are going to kind of track around it should they form. But at this point, over the next 10 days, we're not seeing any major hurricane activity showing up, at least through now what'll be the front half of August. Remember, though, over the next, to be honest, about the next 90 days, we still have 90% of our hurricane season coming. So if you just take a look at where we currently stand, this is a graphic that comes from Colorado State University, one of the best universities in the world for forecasting hurricanes and the seasonal totals. We've already had 5 systems, Don being the longest lived, and we are currently sitting above our average on something called accumulated cyclone energy. This is just a metric by which we keep track of total energy within a tropical system, primarily coming from the wind, but we're just looking at that influence. So the line that's smooth and runs up like this is a normal season. So we're at a value of 16 right now. We'll finish the season, if it's average, near 120. So that's what I meant. We still have 90% of this season to go here. Now let's turn our attention to some statistics, because I started off suggesting how warm things are, but it's important to note that when you go back through the month of July and the first 6 days of August, most of the plains and the Midwest, getting over to the Ohio Valley, we saw more cooler days than we did warmer days. Now, it got very hot at the end of July. I'm not denying that. But when you add that up against how cool it was for the rest of the month, this is what you see. You come down to our Gulf Coast, or down here into the south, like into Texas, into the Four Corner States, and up the West Coast, very, very hot. And I have no relief in sight for the heat that is going to be in this area going forward. It is going to continue to have multiple days well above 100, and of course that stretches into Arizona and Southern California as well. On the precipitation side of it, here is the latest ranks I've got. Again, the time period would be July the 1st through August the 6th. And this past weekend, we saw incredibly heavy rain that came across the heart of the Corn Belt here. But there are still pockets that have missed out on this. And I want to take note here. Look at this climate reporting district in North Dakota. 127 out of 131 years of data showing up so very, very dry. And that last system, that slow mover we talked about, came out of Wyoming and just moved its way across the country, and it's just sitting here today. It did not deliver the rain this far to the north, which means the Canadian prairie is still very dry as well. The flip-flop on either side of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado is incredible. In fact, we had more heavy rain and hail in Colorado this weekend. Heavy rains have moved into this region as well. And of course, last week we saw the flooding rains coming out of Missouri into parts of the Mid-South. Elsewhere, we have some patchy drought that tried to develop down here in the southeast, although big squall and storms came through and probably helped alleviate that. But it's been a year where we've not seen a strong monsoonal circulation. Despite storms in this area, it's not truly been driven by the monsoon. In the Pacific Northwest, we've also watched drought expand here as well, even though there were some decent storms across parts of the Pacific Northwest over the weekend. So what did the last 7 days look like? Now, this goes through midnight. I'm recording this a little after 5 a.m. this morning. And when you look at this, what we've got here is total accumulated precipitation from the last 7 days. And I bring this up to stress this very wet corridor that is right in through here. And you can see that there have been some places in this area that have picked up 6 to 12 inches of rainfall as of late. It is also important to note that there are spots that have been missed. And you notice much of Texas, pockets of the lower Mississippi River Valley. Look at parts of Ohio, Wisconsin, and there are holes that stretch here in the upper Midwest. Same thing throughout the western mountains and across the Pacific Northwest with places that have missed out on this recent precipitation. And I do note holes here in North Carolina, for example, as well. And that's why we're going to look at the latest drought monitor again. We looked at it on Friday, but the storms that came in over this weekend hit this area. And we need to talk about how the drought monitor is still looking at the longer-term drought stress. But when we look back at total precipitation over shorter time periods, we can see that moisture coming through that area. So maybe I'll come back here. Let's flip this over and just say, what about the last 72 hours? This is also going to be masked for everything that is below a half inch. So now we're looking for the really heavy rainfall. We had what's called a mesoscale convective system that came out of Nebraska, went across northern Missouri, and on Saturday went right in through this area here, delivering some desperately needed rainfall to parts of Illinois and Indiana, and eventually pulled into parts of Michigan. But some places in through here picked up over 6 inches of rain out of this. We then had the low, as I mentioned, that came out, and it is what delivered all of this heavy rain that's in this area as well. You're still capturing the tail end of the rains from the end of last week down here, but there were severe storms that rolled through the central part of Illinois over the weekend and into the southeast as well. And we're going to show you those in a few moments. Plus, there were some of them in Colorado. So I just want you to see that heavy rain that was not included in this drought monitor update. So let's go another way here. This is the last 14 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. And this is through yesterday morning, through Sunday morning. So I'm trying to identify a few of these places that have missed out on these rains. And you get over here from this part of Illinois, which did actually get hit last night, so that's not reflected in this. But over to the mid-Atlantic, down into the Carolinas, pockets of Georgia, Alabama, getting out to the lower Mississippi River Valley. And then our largest hole here when you're east of the Rockies has been in Texas and southern parts of Oklahoma. Now, we do have some storm chances coming in here, but not into south central parts of Texas. Drought has expanded in the Pacific Northwest and California, which is normal for this time of year, has been dry. We do know the reservoir strength throughout California, though, is pretty good at this point. Other places, my color bar stops at 325% of normal. So we have places that are not just 3 times their normal rainfall, but right in through here, some places up to 10 times their normal rainfall just in the last couple of weeks. So some satellite data as the sun is rising here. This is what's left of the Wknd system. Remember, this is the one that started in Wyoming and is just moving its way across the country. But if I take you back to yesterday, this circulation here is what started off as a mesoscale convective system that came out of Nebraska and went across Illinois, and it still looked very healthy late in the day. Speaking of late-day storms, large squall line rolled through the south, a lot of severe wind reports out of this. We had more hail in parts of Colorado and heavy rains that moved with the system here. You can see the wildfire smoke from British Columbia coming through parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and into the northern plains of the United States. And then we have wildfire smoke that's both from British Columbia, but also from some fires in the Pacific Northwest showing up here as well. As I play forward, I do want you to note there's a large fire in northern Arizona, one in northern New Mexico as well we're keeping a close eye on. All right, on the radar, this is what the animation looks like over the last 12 hours. So we can see these systems all playing out 3 areas of spin, 1, 2, and 3. And this morning, look at the rain coming through parts of Oklahoma. Now again, it's kind of hitting that line right here where south of it we've been so dry, north of it we've been wet. But just important to see where the rain sits early this morning on radar. Okay, all hazards weather map. Got the excessive heat warnings that are out from Texas all the way to Florida. Flood watches here and here. Red flag warnings in the 4 corner states and into parts of Oregon, and some wind advisory down here where the Ohio and Illinois rivers meet. Hail, just to show you what it looked like, this is just the weekend's worth of hail. And again, we're tracking well above average on our hail statistics this year. And this past weekend saw several more events of large hail roll across the part of the United States here in the central U.S. But where this is all going is being told by the upper level flow. And as I play this through the middle of this week, what do we see? Multiple troughs of low pressure rolling through the northern tier of the United States, squashing the ridge down farther to the south. As we play through Wednesday into Thursday, each of these increases the chance out ahead of them where the best lift will be, and therefore showers and storms and even low pressure development. And as we get into the weekend, the concern going into early next week is that we might develop a bit of a high over low pattern in the west. So that delivers troughs here. That keeps the heat to the south. That makes the heat come back into the Pacific Northwest to start off next week. And the longevity of this pattern is going to be dependent on the trough that you see here over the Aleutian Islands. So to play this forward, we watch Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday. That trough still sitting here is going to help reinforce the ridge that's just off the west coast. That's the positive PNA pattern. So you get a trough that dips here. That keeps this region cool, that keeps this region unsettled, and storms just will come out in a direction just like this. But as I play it forward past the middle of the month out here toward the 19th and 20th, we start to lose the depth of that trough and the ensembles, but we don't really lose the flow. But it could mean that we're going to have to watch for the potential for some heat to really rebound in the midsection of the country, but maybe not for a while. What this pattern says is warm here, hot in the south, above average in the west, cool and unsettled in this section of the country. So here it is. This is the newest update from the WPC over the next 7 days, and we can kind of identify that very wet corridor. One important thing to note is the area that's expected to be drier, which had encompassed more of the Canadian Prairie, more of the upper Midwest, it's kind of shrunk a bit, and we start to see better chances of rain in the upper Midwest. But these two corridors will be our wettest corridors across the United States. The southwestern monsoon's on a bit of a break right now. It had some decent storms in it, but that wasn't going to be long-lived. There are chances for storms coming into the panhandles, which are desperately needed, but as I said, south of there expected to be quite dry. West is dry as well. So let's kind of go ahead and have a look at some things. Here's our next 3 days of severe weather outlook. And I want to focus primarily on today's outlook because we can see a very large area that stretches from Alabama all the way to New York of risk of severe weather. And they put an enhanced risk in here for that region. Part of that is going to be driven by this low that's coming out of the Midwest, that by tonight, you're going to watch the leading edge of one of the fronts on this being able to kick off a line of severe storms. Now, right now, the concern, I think, is going to be greatest in terms of straight line wind damage, but that could stretch, again, all the way from New York up here near the triple point of this low, all the way down here on this side of the Appalachian Mountains, clear down to Georgia, and eventually down into Florida as well. Now, the model is not going to resolve well either the timing or the intensity or placement. We're just looking at what's happening here. A lot of isolated storms elsewhere across the country through this evening, and as we play this out into tomorrow, I'll keep an eye right into this corridor here. Also for some storms to come out of parts of Nebraska as well. So this is getting into Tuesday morning, playing to Tuesday afternoon and evening. So a lot of scattered storm activity happening across the country as the ridge regains its strength in the west once we work later in this week. So just be aware that that's what we've got going on. But with all of those troughs diving into this area, take a look at what the European model is suggesting here. So this is playing through today. There's the storm system late tonight we're going to be keeping an eye on. Then we see following this up, another low curling up here with scattered storms by midweek here in the midsection of the country. Where do those go? Over the Ohio River Valley Wednesday into Thursday, and then make their way here into the east by the time we get into late week. But there's another low that follows it, another trough, and this one's coming in on Friday. That's the one we're going to watch carefully for better moisture in the upper Midwest and northern plains, and then that does the same thing. Several lows, all following the broader trough curling through here. Their storms build into this direction as we work through the next 5 to 7 days. Now after that, the ridge regains some strength into the west. So the pattern once we go into week 2 is going to look a bit different. But overall, the next 10 days, this is the probability of getting an inch of rainfall. I'm keeping an eye on a couple of drier spots, like right in through here. I was surprised to see the 0Z run did not improve that over yesterday's model runs. But you can see that this area, the Appalachian Mountains, could be influencing the storm activity right here in Virginia, North and South Carolina. But everywhere it's in that deepest red, that means the chances of getting at least an inch of rain are between 90 and 100%. Wettest locations, this is the probability of 2 inches. And then we go back to the drier locations. These are the probabilities of getting less than a half inch, and here is less than 1/10 of an inch. So again, very concerned about what's happening in central Texas here with the lack of precipitation and where the hole to the north is kind of shifted here, moving its way back into parts of the western Dakotas and into parts of Montana. All right, what about week 2? When we look at the models for week 2, the CPC and the European model have very similar outlooks. They're keeping a pretty broad area quite stormy. It's right in through here. But you notice the west is expected to have a little bit of a drier signal. That's primarily due to the size of the ridge that we see building into this area once we get into early next week. That is also in the GFS, but again, I'm sorry I have to bring this up every time, but I want to make sure everybody knows we still see the too dry bias down here across the south and east. So that leaves us with the temperature discussion before we get into some new long-range stuff. And here's today's forecast for temperature anomalies. Hundreds in Texas, 70s in Nebraska. Just amazing to see the difference here, over a 30-degree swing in temperatures north to south. Getting into Tuesday and Wednesday, that really doesn't change too much. We just keep extreme heat down here across the south. But by Thursday into Friday, some of that warmth begins to spread back a bit farther to the north. Now, late this week, going into the weekend, we're going to watch some heat build into the Pacific Northwest and throughout California by next Sunday. So we're going to watch for very hot temperatures here, brief interlude of hot temperatures, probably 5 or 6 days as the ridge regains some position in the west. But for the most part, the next several days, well, we can just summarize it by looking at one map here. This is your next 5 days in terms of temperature anomalies. This is out there day 5 through 10. That's when the ridge regains position. The heat stays on in Texas. We see the southeast warming up a bit as well. This goes out all the way from the 12th to the 17th. And if we play the next 5 days, which goes through here, this gets us out to the 22nd. Notice we don't really see a major risk of long duration heat into this section of the country. It's staying south, southeast, and west overall in this pattern. Now that's been shown to us also by the Climate Prediction Center. Their weekend updates look like this for week 2, the temperature and the precipitation pattern. But on Friday they released a new outlook which stretches from the 19th of August to the 1st of September. And they're not really breaking that down much. I mean, look at this stormy corridor in through here with cooler conditions. The heat stays south in their forecast. That's also being echoed right now by the European model forecast. This takes it out even farther. This goes from the 15th of August to the 15th of September. And again, it's identified a very stormy corridor in this particular area. And I know you see a few blotches of brown in here. I'll just tell you something. I still think this whole corridor stays open for a lot of storm activity. We will likely be drier in Texas. We'll be drier in the Pacific Northwest with this pattern. But outside of that, possibly a wetter corridor continuing in through here as we move into the month of September. The big wild card for Texas all the way to Virginia, this whole area, would be the risk of any tropical system that is not forecastable by the European system here doing the weekly forecast update. So I moved through that because I really want to stress for you in these last few tabs here what's going on the bigger picture. You see, we have watched all summer long this El Nino, which is showing up in ocean temperatures, but not showing up in the true behavior of the trade winds. And what we've now seen as of late is that our Southern Oscillation Index, which is a measure of the pressure difference between Tahiti in the Pacific, the South Pacific, with Darwin, which is in the north of Australia. And since late July, the values have come way down. And we talked about this last week. We need to get this number below -7. Today, it hit -10. So that downward progression represents the development of more westerly wind bursts across the Pacific Ocean. It represents the change in the atmosphere, finally signaling that El Nino might be taking over. And this weekend, we got new long-range updates from the European model. So on Saturday, we saw the newest forecast for El Nino. If you take the average of the forecast plume here, we expect to gain another degree Celsius above normal in the equatorial Pacific. And if it does that, this means that we'll go into this fall time period with El Nino likely being our dominant teleconnection. It has not been all summer long. It just hasn't. We've had other factors like the movement of the Bermuda High or the ridging over parts of Canada. That's been the dominant factor this summer. But it could be that this fall that we're going to have to watch for this. Now, earlier in this presentation, I told you about the hurricane season. This was a bit of a surprise. You see, the long-range European model will forecast tropical storm frequency. And if we just look at the numbers here, the newest August update gave us a number here in this part of the Atlantic of between 8.1 to 8.5. Okay, so 8.1 being the climate mean, 8.5 being the forecast. So a little bit above average. See the difference there? Look at what it said back in July. 16.6. Amazing to see the potential differences here, given that our hurricane season honestly hasn't produced much up to this point. So pretty sizable drop once you now get here into the September, October, November forecast. Okay, this actually goes all the way to February. So I just want to take note of that. But I also want to remind you, you know what I'm about to say. It only takes one system, but the ocean temperatures are so warm right in through here that should anything get close to the U.S. coast and maintain tropical characteristics, it could very easily become a powerful system that rolls into the United States and cause major issue. So we need to take this kind of in light of what the ocean temperatures are doing. On the other side of this, though, take a look at the new outlook for September, October, November. Overall, for much of the U.S., we see a wetter pattern. I know you're going, wait a minute, I see dryness in here. And I'm just going to tell you that we're going to have to call this into question in the models. Because anytime you see a really wet signal that kind of opens up into this area, it almost always cascades into the southeast. Most importantly, when there's not a big ridge here. And there's no forecast of a big ridge to sit in that area. Where I'm concerned about there being drier risks are going to be in parts of the west. Now, this same forecast was echoed by the long-range outlook from the CPC, which we'll get a new one of those in about 10 days from now. But we need to take this and go beyond this as well. So what I want to do for you next is just show you this would be October, November, December, and then this is November, December, January. And during that time frame, you saw much above average precipitation being forecast here and drier in the Pacific Northwest. And what this is really suggesting is that the model has really locked into an El Nino-like fall pattern. And what happens when there's an El Nino in fall is we tend to have a late start to the wet season in the Pacific Northwest, but a very active subtropical jet coming across the United States, which means very wet conditions in through here and the risk of wetter harvest across a big section of the eastern half of the United States. So we need to understand that this is what the models are up to. Here's the other thing that we're looking at. I was a bit surprised to see such highly anomalous upper-level trough ridge pattern forecast by the European model when the new seasonal updates came out on Saturday. And this is what I'm talking about. The depth of this trough off the west coast, plus the ridging here, suggests that the pattern is going to dive south with a strong subtropical jet that's going to race across the southern tier of the United States in winter. This would mean an extremely active south and then east coast storm system. The flow would then come over a ridge splitting across the western United States, meaning that the farther north you go, the drier this upcoming winter could potentially be, while California could be on the receiving end of multiple atmospheric river events. This would suggest an extremely active winter for much of the United States if this height pattern does verify. And just to show you, this is the latest update for December, January, and February. If you ask me to draw you a map that shows the typical El Nino winter, it would look exactly like this in terms of precipitation. Exactly like this. We have run the risk of being a bit warmer than normal to the north and cooler than normal to the south with this pattern as well. But I just thought we'd look out at it. It's very speculative. It's based on one thing, but it's always good to just have a look at what the models are saying so that we together can watch the evolution of this. So I wanted to bring you up to speed on those new longer range outlooks. The last couple things here have to do with international weather. And over the next 10 days, we're seeing quite a bit of heat in certain parts of the world like Australia, South Africa, and parts of Brazil. Very, very warm here, including Chile as well. We see that there is not expected to be a lot of heat throughout much of mainland Europe. The heat's here in this part of Russia. And if you look elsewhere around the world at the precipitation patterns, you get more storms throughout Europe this week. In fact, it's quite cold morning this morning in Europe. Heavier rains in southern Brazil. Keep an eye on that for a second. Notice how weak the monsoon is behaving right now in parts of India. It's very wet in the Ganges River Valley over toward Bangladesh and also hitting parts of Tibet. And then we are noticing, again, dry conditions after the last 10 days, which brought tremendous flooding into this part of China. But I want to bring you back to South America to finish this up, because the weekend new model forecast runs looked like this for October, November, December. Now remember, it's on September the 15th, I'll put it right there, on September the 15th that planting can begin and throughout Brazil. There is concern that with the positive Atlantic meridional mode and the development of El Nino, that this could be a later start to the monsoon farther to the north, while wetter conditions will sit in southern Brazil and Argentina. There's still drought that needs undone in Argentina, so this will be critical rains to come into this area. But it's going to be a story we're going to have to follow because our attention will turn in the agricultural world, if you're a corn and bean farmer, to what's going on down in South America. So listen, I thank you so much for all the extra time on Monday. Had a lot to think about over the weekend with these new long-range updates coming out, plus the severe threat coming up here and where the heat's shifting around. Have a great week, though, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. Thanks.